After the death of my parents from a drunk driver, a hit and run, I inherited the old farmhouse I grew up in. There was a lot to do there, and I didn't know if I would just clean out their stuff and put it on the market, or if I would stay and live there. I know going through all their belongings would take me months, but I had to do it whether I stayed there or I sold the place. The farming equipment in the barns would be auctioned off, so that was a load off my shoulders. One Friday night, I decided to go through the countless boxes they accumulated over the years. My parents had kept them in the guest room, and since I'm a loner and had no other plans, I decided it was as good a time as any. I am the only child, so I couldn't pawn this off onto a sibling. Unfortunately, I was the only one that was going to get this done. I had a glass of wine in one hand and my phone in the other. I picked my 80s music playlist, downed half a glass of wine, and started opening boxes. There were so many boxes of pictures, some of people I didn't even know. I had no idea what I was going to do with all those. I found some of my baby pictures and put them aside. I wasn't going to throw those in the trash, but the other ones, those were. By the time I got through the fourth box, I had drank a whole bottle of wine. I have made more of a mess than actually throwing things out. I decided I had done enough damage for the night, and all I wanted to do was eat frozen pizza and go to bed. I headed to the kitchen and set the oven for 425 and headed back to the guest room. I needed to at least throw one box of junk away. I grabbed the box of pictures of people I didn't know. They could be family, but these pictures were way before my time. I felt satisfied that at least one box made it into the trash. I could eat my pizza guilt-free. I slept hard that night, and my head was pounding in the morning. Coffee. I needed coffee. I headed for the kitchen, but then I remembered my mom wouldn't allow a coffee pot in the house. My dad had had high blood pressure, and that was her way of contributing to his health. Little did she know that he always drove to the little gas station right outside of town for his cup of coffee. Sometimes it was 2, but she never found out about his little trips he made in the morning. I grabbed my jacket and my keys, and I was hoping to find a Starbucks within reasonable distance. I stepped outside the back door, and there on the ground were the pictures scattered everywhere. I know I drank more last night than I usually do, but I know I put that box of pictures inside the trash. I couldn't deal with it without at least one cup of coffee, so I got in my car and searched for a Starbucks. I found a Starbucks and sat and drank my coffee, wishing I had stuck to only one glass of wine last night instead of the whole bottle. I reluctantly headed home to clean up the mess that I assumed raccoons had made. I figured they were searching for a meal in the trash can. After cleaning up the mess, my plan was to get the guest room done. I needed to go through everything I wanted to keep and toss what I didn't. The last couple of boxes were pretty big, so I was going to pull those away from the wall so I had more room to sort through stuff. The first box I pulled away was pretty light. In fact, it was so light I didn't think anything was in it. I went to grab the next box, and it too felt like there wasn't anything in it. And just like I thought, there was nothing in them. I went to pull the boxes away from the wall, but I noticed a piece of paneling was coming away from it. I pulled on it to see if there was any water damage or anything that needed worked on. But as I looked closer, there was nothing. Nothing. No wall, no studs to hammer it back in place. I pulled on the paneling and it came away pretty easily. There behind the paneling was an opening that led into a dark crawl space. We have an attic above the bedrooms, but this was in the wall behind them. I don't ever remember there being a closet there or another room. This was becoming a little too much for me. I kind of wish I wasn't such a loner so I could call up a buddy and ask them to crawl into this dark unknown space with God knows what or who was in there. If I was going to be able to sleep tonight in that house, I had to find out what the heck this room was. With a flashlight in one hand, I crawled into the dark, with my hands patting the wall, hoping to find a light switch. And ta-da! I found one. Now things were getting really strange. This didn't look like the house I grew up in. I knew all of the rooms and the closets, and if there was a hidden room behind the paneling, I would have found it and I would have made it my own to hide out in. Somewhere to go when my dad was mad at me, like the time I accidentally shot out the barn window with my BB gun, or backed up and ran over the mailbox when I had been grounded from the car. But no, I had never seen this little dark crawl space. When the light turned on, it opened up to a bigger area, and the ceiling was higher, tall enough that I could stand up in it. By now I was starting to get scared. I was scared of what I might find. What I did find was a pile of candy wrappers, fast food bags, pop bottles, and what looked like men's underwear and a blanket. I said, "Fuck this," and I ran out towards the little entryway. I forgot that you had to crawl in to get there, so I slammed my head on a 2x4 and started to see stars. I said a few cuss words, then slammed the paneling back in place and hightailed it out of there, but not before I slammed the door shut. I couldn't comprehend why there was a little room in there, and how come I had never seen it before. And what makes it even creepier was it looks like somebody had been living in there. I grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter and jumped in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. I just needed to get out of that house. I stopped to get a bite to eat and took my time. I wasn't in a hurry to get back. I needed to get some answers to these questions that were spinning in my head. When I pulled in the driveway, the sun was starting to set, and as I walked up to the back door, there, by the trash can, were all those family pictures that I had thrown away. I was pretty sure it wasn't a raccoon. No, this time I think it was a human, like maybe the one who had been living in that hidden room. I didn't know who this person was, or what they wanted, or why they were throwing old pictures away. There was no way I was going to deal with this by myself, so I called my roommate up and begged him to come drive an hour to possibly confront some squatter from my mom and dad's house. It took him an hour and a half to get there, but I had never been so happy to see someone as I saw him pulling in the driveway. The first thing he said after getting out of the car was, "Let's go get this Frogger." The look on my face let him know that I had no idea what he was talking about. He went on to say, the crime of somebody secretly living in someone's home is called frogging, a reference to frogs leaping from one place to another. It's pronounced frogging, but it's spelled with a PH. Well, whatever it's called, let's get this done. He said, "Okay, let's go check this out," and he followed me into the house. I wasn't thinking about actually confronting anybody. I mean, what was I going to do if there was somebody actually in the crawl space? I had no gun. There wasn't even a bat in the house. I took that when I moved out. I told my roommate my concerns, and he said, "Don't worry about it. I always have something with me." I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't care at the time. I just wanted this over with. I led the way up the stairs and into the guest room. I pulled back the paneling that was covering the entryway. The light was on in there, but I don't remember if I had turned it off or not. I showed my roommate where I had found the pop cans and the food wrappers and men's underwear, and he looked at me and said, "Yep, somebody's been crashing in here." We looked around at any possible place that somebody could be hiding. We looked for any more false walls. We didn't find any in there, so we checked out the rest of the house. We checked the walls, floors for loose boards, and looked in the basement to see if anybody was hiding down there, but it all looked clear. I was getting hungry, and I knew he had to have been after the long drive. We decided to order a pizza and waited. It took about 45 minutes to get there, but that was actually normal considering how far out we lived. We sat back on the couch and ate our pizza and drank a couple of beers. We watched some classics on TV. Ghostbusters, the first one of course, The Fast and the Furious. We attempted to watch Rocky, but we both fell asleep shortly after the beginning. I don't know how long we were sleeping when we both were awakened to a loud crash. We both looked at each other, jumped up from the couch, and ran upstairs. I was pretty proud of how brave I was, but I know it was all the adrenaline that was pumping through me. We headed straight to the guest room because that's where we expected the noise to have come from. We didn't see anything strange. The false wall was still in place, and nothing seemed out of the norm. I was about to pull the paneling away from the wall when we heard the sound of someone running down the stairs. It felt like a scene out of some movie. We both took off towards the stairs. My roommate was ahead of me when we rounded the corner to the staircase. My roommate went all ninja and dove head first down the stairs. He had tackled some guy, and now they were wrestling at the bottom of the stairs. I was shocked for a minute, and I just stood there and watched. I was never the fighting type. I was always more into books than I was lifting weights like most of the other guys. As my roommate was tackling this guy, I ran past them and into the living room and grabbed my phone. I called 911 as I was giving them the address. I heard a loud bang. There was no mistaking that sound. It was a gun. Somebody had gotten shot. I was frozen and I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go out to the hall to see who was left standing. It was either my roommate or the freak that has been living in my parents' house. I stood there waiting to hear something, but everything remained quiet, except for the 911 operator who was demanding I tell her if that was a gunshot and did anybody in the house have a gun. I put my phone down on the end table and tiptoed towards the hall. I slowly poked my head out and saw my roommate standing in a puddle of his own blood. I really think I came close to passing out at that moment. I frantically started to look around at my surroundings. Where did this guy go, and does he have the gun? I crouched down to where my roommate was lying and started to shake him and ask him if he was okay. I saw that he got shot around his left shoulder, so I grabbed a hand towel and pressed down hard to stop the bleeding, and that's when I heard, "Ouch, that fucking hurts." I felt a big sigh of relief when he cussed me out, so I was pretty sure he was going to be okay. The police and an ambulance showed up. They packed up my roommate and took him to the hospital as the police were searching the house. I showed them the paneling and the crawl space in the guest room and told them what I had found. They did a thorough search of the house and didn't find anything. They just said whoever it was probably miles away by now, but if I heard anything strange, I was to call them immediately. My head was spinning. I had to call the hospital to check on my roommate to see if he was okay. They told me he was okay, but they wanted to keep him overnight to make sure. I sat back and I couldn't believe what had all happened. I mean, what a shit show. I found a hiding place where someone had been staying, my roommate gets shot, and now some lunatic is on the loose with my roommate's handgun. The sun was starting to rise, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to go to sleep anyway, so I got in my car and headed to Starbucks. I ordered what I usually do, and I got another one for my roommate, then headed to the hospital. When I got there, my roommate's girlfriend was there, and so we all sat and talked for a couple hours about the events of the night. My roommate was going to be released later that day, and his girlfriend was going to take him home, and they would pick up his car later in the week. I got home and headed straight for the couch. I was so tired I was out within minutes. I'm not sure how long I slept, but when I woke up, it was already starting to get dark. I felt like shit, and all I wanted to do was take a shower. I headed upstairs to grab some clothes when I noticed on every stair on the staircase had a family picture on it. Those damn family pictures I threw away several days ago, the same ones the lunatic kept throwing out of the garbage can. There was a trail of them heading upstairs. I don't know why I didn't just turn around and run. Maybe it was because I was just so freaking tired of this bullshit. I didn't know, but I headed straight towards the guest room. The paneling was pulled away from the wall, and I can tell that the light was on in there. This fucker was inviting me to come inside. I wasn't thinking about what I was going to do when I got in there. I just went in. I walked into the middle of the room. There was the box of pictures. What the hell was this guy's fascination with my old family pictures? I walked over to the box and kicked it as hard as I could. Then I heard that asshole laughing. It sounded like it was coming from above somehow. He had made it into the attic, so I went to the hall and pulled down the ladder from the ceiling and climbed up. I flipped the light switch on, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Every inch of the wall was covered with pictures. Pictures of my mom and dad, and even pictures of me at different ages. There were pictures that were taken inside the house. There was one of my mom cooking, and a couple of my dad reading a newspaper at the dining room table. There was some of me that looked like it had been taken from the hall through a half-closed door. I started to sweat and I felt like I was going to puke. I heard that laughing again. The motherfucker was up in the attic somewhere laughing at me. I didn't want to go check out the dark corners in the attic for him. At this point, I didn't care. He could have the house if he wanted. I just wanted out of there. And as I turned around to make my escape, the ladder slammed shut. I tried to step on it, but it wouldn't budge. I tried to jump on it, and again, it wouldn't budge. It was like somebody was holding it shut from underneath. I grabbed a piece of pipe that was leaning against a beam, and I began to bang on the ladder. This freak was playing with me, and I'm sure he was enjoying it. I knew there was a window at the other end of the attic. I knew there was no light bulb over there. It was dark as hell, but I needed to try and find a way out. I took the pipe with me and I walked into the darkness, every once in a while swinging the pipe around to protect myself if anyone was creeping up on me. I reached the window and tried to open it, and it wouldn't budge. I looked out, and it was pitch dark. And even if I could get the window open, it was a 2-story drop. There was no ledge to climb out on. We had no close neighbors, close enough to see anything or hear me yell if I screamed. All I could think about was I was going to be stuck in that attic till later that week when my roommate's girlfriend came to pick up his car. Well, that is unless this lunatic gets me first. At that thought, I grabbed the pipe tighter in my hands and yelled out, "What the fuck do you want? Let me out of here." And with that, all I got was a manic laughter. This time it sounded like it was underneath me, like in the direction of the guest room. Somehow he was moving around the house, not just from hiding in the room in the wall, but somehow through the ceiling. I looked around the attic the best I could in the dark. I wanted to find where this asshole was and how he was moving freely around in the house. Then I found it. Over by the chimney was a board laying on the ground. I felt around the floor with the pipe and found an opening. The board was covering a hole in the floor of the attic. That's how this asshole was getting from one place to another and was able to hide without being seen. I sat down on the ground and slid my feet into the hole, trying to grab onto anything I could. I felt a board, and I used it to slowly lower myself. I was standing on the floor joist and was pretty sure I was standing above the guest room. There was a drop ceiling, so I moved one of the panel pieces out of the way and jumped down. I stood right in the middle of the guest room. Either this freak was in the crawl space or out in the hall. Either way, I was going to confront him and possibly get shot by my roommate's gun. I took a couple of steps towards the crawl space when I heard something out in the hall, and that's when I took off running. I saw him pulling down the ladder, and as he started to climb up, I grabbed his legs and pulled him down. He fell hard and the gun went flying from his hands. I ran and grabbed it and pointed it at him. In all my life, I have never seen anyone so horrifying as this guy. He was pale with dark circles around his eyes, long, dark, greasy hair that was all ratted. He had a freakish grin on his face that said, "Go ahead and shoot me, I don't care." We both just stood there and stared at each other, and that's when he charged me. He came running at me so fast I had no time to think. I shot him 3 or 4 times, and he was only within inches of me. He stood there for a minute before falling backwards. He laid there, bleeding, just staring up at the ceiling. I didn't know if he was alive or if he was dead. I didn't want to move. I was so scared he would get up and hide somewhere else in the house, but I knew I needed to call the police. I could picture the scene from Friday the 13th when Michael Myers fell from the 2nd-story window. He walked away from that, so maybe this guy could too. I held the gun tightly in my hands, and I went down and got my phone while constantly looking behind me. I called the police and waited at the back door. I waited to hear the sirens and the red and blue flashing lights. As they started to approach the house, I felt like I was in a dream. Their guns were raised and pointed at me, yelling at me to drop the gun and get on my hands and knees. I wasn't even sure if I was breathing at that point. I snapped out of it. I threw the gun on the ground and backed away from the door and put my hands on my head. There was a policeman that looked familiar. He was one of them that showed up when my roommate was shot. He calmly told me to step aside and everything was going to be okay. He kept asking me questions and all I could say was, "In the hall, in the hall." He put me in the back seat of his car while the rest of the officers entered the home with their guns raised. Ambulances showed up, and I was escorted to one of them. They were asking me questions and taking my blood pressure and checking me for wounds. Then I see a stretcher being wheeled out of the house with that freak on it. He had an O2 mask on his face, and it looked like one of the paramedics were attempting CPR. How could this guy still be alive after being shot 3 or 4 times at close range? The next several days I was in a haze. It consisted of talking to the police and detectives, packing my stuff up from my childhood home and moving it back to my apartment that I shared with my roommate. He was out of the hospital and doing pretty good for being shot. It was the weekend, so we both decided to hang out at home, which was something that I always did anyway. I was about to go to sleep when I heard a knocking at the door. I knew my roommate and his girlfriend had gone to bed hours ago, so I got up. I looked through the peephole and I saw 2 officers standing on the other side of the door. I just assumed they had more questions for me, but it was strange why they would be coming this late at night. I invited them in, and they told me that the lunatic that had been living in the crawl space in my mom and dad's house had not only survived the gunshots, but recovered and escaped from the hospital. The officers wanted to know if I had seen or heard anything, and that if I did, to call them immediately. I mean, what the fuck? Are you kidding me? This guy is on the loose. I must have stood at the door for like 10 or 15 minutes before I grabbed my keys and headed for my car. I knew where I was going, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got there. As I pulled into my mom and dad's house, I headed for the garage. My dad had always kept 2 full cans of gas in there all year long. I grabbed them both and headed for the house. I put one down and took the other one upstairs, and I found myself in the guest room, pouring gas on every inch of it. I poured a trail of gas down the stairs, then grabbed the other can and began pouring gas on every inch of every room. The last of the gas was poured at the back door, leaving a puddle. I had grabbed the matches that my dad had always kept in the junk drawer in the kitchen and struck a match and dropped it inside the back door and then slammed it shut. As I was backing out of the driveway, I could already see the glass from the window busting and flames coming from the back door. After that, I never looked back. When I got back to my place, my roommate was still asleep. I washed my hands and changed my clothes and went back to bed. I woke up to my roommate telling me there were police officers and they wanted to talk to me. They had told me my mom and dad's house had burned down and they think it was arson, and they wanted to know if I knew anything about it. I said no, and that I had been home all night with my roommate and his girlfriend, and my roommate had confirmed that yes, I had stayed there all night, and the officers seemed to be satisfied with that. I was never questioned again about that night, but a couple of days later, I was told that they had found a body in the rubble, and that they think whoever had started the fire had also died in the fire. I felt relieved it was over, but last night, I found a picture of myself as a child on my pillow,